Episode 3 of the Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary, executive produced by Bill Simmons. This is my review of it. I have done reviews yesterday on the first 2 episodes, so I figured today I would do a review on the 3rd episode and the 4th episode. I think tomorrow we'll wrap it up with the last 2. And I am recording this the day before you hear it because I wanted to watch episode 3 and then take a little bit of a break, and do other things, work on some other things. But I did want to discuss this documentary, episode 3. So episode 3 is called Screwjob, and, well, you kind of know where that's going. The often talked about Montreal Screwjob. There have been a lot of documentaries done on this, and that was sort of the main event of this episode. But the whole, this whole episode was loaded with things that are really familiar to a lot of wrestling fans because they've been documented multiple times. Not just the Montreal Screwjob, but also the Monday Night War and what was going on in the world during that time. Now, of the 3 episodes, this one, I'm not going to say it's the least interesting because that's not the way I really feel. It's interesting. It's just that these topics are topics that I've already heard Vince McMahon and others comment on. I mean, they talk about Eric Bischoff's 83 weeks. He has a whole podcast about it. He even plugs it on here. Like how they were beating Raw, and they talked about the Lex Luger jump. The episode really focuses on the Monday Night War. That the most of the bulk of the episode is that, and it sort of leads into the screw job at the end. But one of the things they did at the very beginning of the episode that I appreciated was they showed footage and told the story of the first screw job that Vince McMahon was behind, which was in the mid-'80s when Wendi Richter did not want to drop the title. And so Fabulous Moolah dressed up as a character known as Spider Lady, and they did the first screw job where Moolah took her down. The referee counts 3, but Wendi Richter clearly had her shoulders up, and Spider Lady gets unmasked by Wendi Richter as being Moolah, who was a shooter, and they have sort of a scuffle. I wouldn't really call it a fight. Spider Lady runs away, and then Wendi Richter goes to the back, looks at Vince, looks down, leaves the building, and he never saw her again, even though she did go in the Hall of Fame a few years ago, if I remember correctly. But for a long time, he didn't see her. And I'm glad that they opened the episode with that and the whole thing is Vince was very unapologetic about it. He's like, it's my belt, you do what I want. That was his whole thing from a promoter. And that was a good way to sort of sow the seeds for people, those who knew it was coming and those who didn't know. But the reason why I appreciate it is because this is a segment that isn't talked about that much. It's just not talked about that much, and it is legitimately the first screw job before Bret. And they talk about sort of Hulk Hogan going to WCW again, like we talked about in episode 2, and how Bret sort of became the guy, and that would lead to the creation of Nitro, which once again Eric Bischoff tells the story not as accurately as he should, because he says that Ted Turner gave him 2 hours on Monday night when Nitro was 1 hour for the first 9 months of its run, give or take. It didn't become 2 hours until actually the Scott Hall episode where he debuted was the first 2-hour Nitro. Memorial Day, 1996. I saw a lot of this live. I was a kid. And when you get to this part of the story, this is the part that I lived through. I lived through, again, I was a kid, but I lived through a lot of this. And they started talking about, the highlight of the episode for me was they started talking about what WCW and Eric Bischoff were doing to WWF, and that would, of course, lead to the hiring of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. And they didn't tell the entire Scott Hall story. And I get why they didn't have enough time, but Scott Hall did try to renegotiate with Vince multiple times. He's told it on shoot interviews with Sean Oliver and other places. So you can get that out there, but Vince just didn't want to pay him what he thought he was worth. So obviously WCW was paying more, And they covered that. They covered the curtain call when kayfabe was broken. and how bizarre it was. And then something very, very insane happened. Something I never would have thought would have happened. So Vince is playing the victim because WCW, Ted Turner, and they even talked about how he's always pointing the finger at Ted Turner, even though Bischoff was the guy who was the real enemy. Ted Turner didn't even pay attention to WCW, like he didn't. And so what happened was they asked Vince, finally, after all these years, Vince actually gets challenged on the hypocrisy. So for many years, going back 20 years to the original Monday Night War documentary that came out in 2004, which I have on DVD still because I was excited to get that DVD when it first got announced, and I got it back in 04. I didn't have that much money then. I was barely working. I was still pretty young. But I bought it with my own money, and I thought it was embarrassing because they were playing the victim, saying that WCW took our talent, they put Nitro at the same time Raw was, and I'm over here just angry because it's bullshit. Like, Vince McMahon, and this was not covered in detail in the documentary, Vince McMahon, everything WCW did to Vince in the 90s, Vince did to other companies in the 80s, other territories, except for giving away their results. That's the one thing that WCW did that Vince had never done. But Vince not only took talent from other places, the man literally told the pay-per-view companies, he put a pay-per-view on at the same time that Starrcade was going to be on, the same exact day on Thanksgiving of 1987. WCW offered, or NWA at the time, offered to move it to an afternoon. That way they could still have the night. So basically, the WCW show would be at 4 or 3, something like that. WWF would be at 7. And Vince told the pay-per-view companies, no, if you air their show at all, even on a different day, if you air their show, you don't get WrestleMania 4. And this was when WrestleMania 3 had just happened, which was the biggest event in wrestling. And that right there is such filthy, disgusting, yet cutthroat business. You have no right to complain and to bitch about Turner and WCW doing it to you. So the interviewer actually calls Vince out on this. This has annoyed me for years, guys. 20 years it's annoying me how Vince plays victim here. Like, dude, at least be a fucking man and just say, hey, yes, we did it. It was taste of our own medicine. I didn't like it. Maybe I regret doing it. That would have at least been more adult, more mature. Instead, he just plays victim. So finally, the interviewer says, your philosophy was different than Ted, you say, about hurting the other person. And then Vince's response, and somebody in my Discord actually wrote it down. So I'm going to read you exactly what Vince said. He says, correct. Some would think it might be hypocritical for me to say, okay, I don't hurt someone else. I just do what's best for me. Yet when someone comes after me, I don't think they have the right. Sure, they have the right. Again, what I say a lot of times is totally different than what I think. And the public doesn't understand that sometimes as a businessman, you have to throw things out there. It's not really the way you feel, but it controls thought processes by doing that. So what he's basically admitting to, and I had to rewind it 3 times to really listen. What he's basically admitting to is that he admits that he played the victim on purpose and that he threw this stuff out there about Turner being predatory and things like that to garner sympathy and to play the company off as being the baby faces, to play the company off as being, victims of this billionaire, trap. And on one hand, it's infuriating that it took Vince this long to actually acknowledge his own hypocrisy. But on the other hand, it's also somewhat interesting as well as kind of comforting that he just straight up admitted, like, yeah, it comes off hypocritical, but I had to say what I had to say. In other words, I had to gaslight people. And for him to admit that, kind of a shocker. Kind of a shocker after this many years. Also, there was a huge mistake made on this that I caught it because I'm a wrestling guy, but I'm sure you guys will too. When they talk about Luger going to Nitro, they show that September 3rd, he was at a WWF house show. September 4th, he was on Nitro. But the footage they show of this house show, which was not televised, was footage from SummerSlam 95 of him attacking Mo during the Diesel Mabel main event, which was his last televised appearance. However, this was 2 weeks prior, or maybe a week and a half prior, and I think it might have actually been 2 weeks. It may have been 2 weeks prior, at SummerSlam in Pittsburgh, and they show on the screen May 3rd, WWF house show. But that's wrong, because the footage is from SummerSlam. And even if you don't know it's from SummerSlam, I knew because I've seen SummerSlam. I watched it live when it aired, that pay-per-view. Literally, the ring apron has the SummerSlam logo on it. And they show Luger attacking Mo with the SummerSlam logo right there on the screen, but the text says May 3rd. That is the first example I can tell you of sloppy editing. Sloppy editing. Also, in episode 3, they revealed that Vince did know and approve of the curtain call. That was another shocker that I wasn't expecting. I thought they just went out there and did it, and Vince no-sold it, and then all his company guys yelled at him, and of course Triple H wound up being the guy who suffered for that, but because he was the only one that was staying, and Shawn was the champion. So, that was something I don't remember ever hearing before. I did not know that Vince approved that, the curtain call when they broke character. They actually say the word kayfabe, too. And they even brought up the whole, Hulk Hogan turning heel, and they asked Vince, would you ever done it? And Vince said no. Vince says he would never turn Hogan heel. Which is interesting because when Hogan did go work for him in 2002, when he went back, he was only a heel for a month. A little over a month. Because if you remember, at WrestleMania, he turned babyface after the Rock match. So it's almost like Vince just did not want to have a heel Hulk Hogan. Ever. Because Hulk Hogan was never a heel in the WWF or WWE for more than that 1 month. He was always a face. Episode 3 climaxes with the Montreal Screwjob, and this is where they start talking about different things such as, what led to the Screwjob. They didn't go into detail too much, but they showed the Sunny Days promo. They showed the Prophecy promo that Shawn cut in April of 97. They didn't talk about the backstage fight. At least I don't think they did. They may have, and maybe I missed it, but they build up to Survivor Series 97. They do focus on that, but that story's been told a gazillion times. I mean, it's not even a new story at this point at all. I mean, obviously it happened, many, many years ago, 97. Almost 30 years ago, man. Almost 30 years ago. But, for people who don't know the story, I'm sure it'll be fascinating. You hear Bruce Pritchard's account. You hear what Vince was thinking. You hear Undertaker commenting on it and the fact they got into a fight. They talk about how Vince and Bret were scuffling in the back, and Shawn talks about how he denied it. They all denied it. And then Bret hits Vince with the uppercut. And they did talk about that. I mean, they didn't show it because that wasn't filmed. But they did talk about Bret punching out Vince. And the documentary ends on the note of, yes, this happened and we were in a dark period, but that would create the Mr. McMahon character. And this is where we're going to get to with part 4, which is all about the Mr. McMahon character, his feud with Steve Austin, of course, and the Attitude Era, which is another story that's been told many times by WWE, usually with truth. They're not super dishonest because they were riding so high at the time, there was no point to be dishonest about the Attitude Era. Everybody knows it was the biggest time period ever for wrestling in the TV era. But I haven't seen it yet. I'm recording this literally after I get done with episode 3, and I'm going to watch episode 4 probably later. However, I do have a storm coming in because I do live in Florida, so hopefully I'll get this out to you soon. If the storm knocks out my power, which I don't know if it will, but if it does, I'll get it to you when I get power back. That remains to be seen. I should be fine, but we'll see. Anyways, episode 3 was fine. Not as good as episode 2. Again, I knew most of it, but it's still interesting to hear them talk about it, and it's still interesting to hear them, especially the part where Vince was questioned, finally, on his hypocrisy. And I am glad, so glad, that they were able to finally get him, and he answered it. So, what did you think? Let me know in the comments down below. I'll see y'all for episode 4.